Welcome to the Tech Talk by Microsoft EMEA. This is 1 hour for your questions from the Microsoft technology. So if you have any questions around licensing, around products, around technology, feel free to ask them here directly in the chat. So I will send a comment, ask your questions here. So you can use the chat or the comment functionality on the channel where you are watching, and you can send in your questions around Microsoft Server, Azure Stack HCI, hybrid technologies, Hyper-V, storage, Active Directory, licensing, products, editions, technologies, and so on. Till you send in your first questions, I will use some time for a recap of our Tech Talks we had in the last month, because today this is the last Tech Talk for this calendar year. And if you attended all the Tech Talks, maybe you remember the Tech Talk we started in October, and there we talked about Windows Server 2022 clustering. If you missed this Tech Talk, the full recording of the Tech Talk is available on my YouTube channel. So you can go to youtube.com/Manfred Helber, or you can also go to youtube.com/Sven Langenfeld, or also on LinkedIn, you will find the recording of this session. And I gave you detailed information about clustering, what it is, how it works. Important is to understand that there are different clustering options in Windows Server 2022. Windows Server 2022 still supports the traditional cluster with an iSCSI storage or fiber channel storage or direct attached SAS storage. But Windows Server also supports in the version 2022 the HCI option as an cluster where we use storage spaces direct to build a hyper-converged infrastructure. The big difference is clustering is in every Windows Server 2022 edition. Storage Spaces Direct is only available in the Data Center edition. So if you want to build a cluster based on Windows Server, you will need Essentials, Standard, or Data Center when you have a traditional cluster. You will need Data Center if you want to build a hyper-converged infrastructure cluster. Okay, here we have a first question, and for sure I will prioritize the questions compared to my recap content. Hi Manfred, for an Azure Arc enabled server, how can I force an immediate update if updates are found? So if we have a server Azure Arc enabled, we can activate additional related services. So we can, for example, use Azure Arc to enable Azure Monitor on such a server, or to enable Azure Policy Management. And the Azure Update Management is also an option that can be activated for an Azure Arc enabled server. So this is an additional functionality. Some of these additional functionalities produce additional costs. So Azure Arc is for free. But if I configure, for example, Azure Monitor, then there could be costs depending on my monitoring volume I have each month. And Azure Backup Management is an additional service without additional costs. So it's free of charge. Today it's free of charge. And if I have the Azure Arc server onboarded for Azure Update Management, then I can configure update policies. And this is the key to success. If I want to have updates now installed, then I have to configure a policy where I ensure that all the updates that should be included have to be implemented today latest. And so I have a policy that says, okay, all the updates I want to enforce on this server must be implemented there latest today. When I apply this policy, then the server will grab these updates. You are asking for immediate. Immediate is always a little bit difficult because immediate means I'm clicking and now it runs. This is only possible via manual update run in the Windows Admin Center or in the server manager console. But if I want to do it via Azure Arc, the policy would be the way of choice to do it. And it will be work fast or what was it? Not immediate, but near time. Yes. Okay, so thanks for this question. Feel free to send in additional questions via the chat. Yeah. In this tech talk about clustering, we also discussed how the majority of votes is built in a cluster. This is important to understand that in a cluster, we always have the situation that if something fails, we have to ensure that we keep the majority of votes. And this is the reason why we usually have a witness. In a traditional cluster, the witness can be a disk. So in this traditional cluster configuration, the witness can be a disk or a loon here from our SAN systems. In an HCI configuration with storage spaces direct, we are usually using a file share or a cloud-based witness. These two options are also available there. Yeah, clustering was one of the topics here in this first tech talk. We also discussed the different storage technologies we can use. And to give you an update about the disk configurations in our tech talk where we talked about clustering, we had the situation that Microsoft required that we have minimum 4 drives in each node. This has changed. So the minimum amount is that we have 2 flash drives. So we can start with only 2 flash drives. So the drives number 3 and 4, they are optional. For sure, in many scenarios in production environment, you will have more drives. You can have up to 26 drives in each server. But the minimum requirement for flash-only configurations was reduced to 2 drives, important only for Azure Stack HCI, not for storage spaces direct in Windows Server. For storage spaces direct in Windows Server, we still have 4 drives minimum required. For Azure Stack HCI, we have a minimum requirement of 2 drives. When we are working flash only, more drives are always allowed. Okay. Then in our second tech talk, we had Hyper-V in detail, how to install and configure VMs in Hyper-V. And in Hyper-V, we have learned that every edition includes Hyper-V, and we have the full Hyper-V feature set in every edition. We have some extended Hyper-V capabilities in Azure Stack HCI. So Azure Stack HCI always provides some additional capabilities and functionalities. When we discussed about the licensing part, we have learned that Hyper-V is a real hypervisor and that Windows Server 2022 Essentials provides usage rights for what we see here actually. This means we have the usage rights for the Windows Server parent partition, plus the hypervisor, plus one guest operating system. So Essentials includes Hyper-V, and Hyper-V means we have a combination of parent partition and hypervisor. And we have one virtual usage right on the licensed server. Essentials. With standard, we have 2 virtual usage rights, but we have to ensure that we have licensed all the physical cores in the server, minimum 16. With Essentials, we have a license for the server, and this covers maximum 10 cores in one socket. This is the maximum. We cannot scale more with Essentials. In Standard, we have to cover each CPU core in the server with a license, and there we have 2 virtual usage rights. When we stack standard licenses, this means we license again all the cores in the server with Windows Server Standard, minimum 16 cores. Then we have exactly this usage rights. Still the usage rights for the parent once with the hypervisor, and now 4 virtual machines because we have licensed the physical cores again. If we stack more, we can decide to use instead data center. There's no transition path to change a standard to a data center license. But from the technical and licensing perspective, it could make sense to decide for data center, because with data center, we also have to license all the physical cores, minimum 16, but now we have unlimited virtual Windows usage rights on the licensed server. Okay, in the Tech Talk on 24th of October, we talked about remote desktop services. Remote desktop services, very important topic for many customers. We have learned that remote desktop services contains several roles: the web access, the gateway, the connection broker, the session host. And we have learned that remote desktop services is still available in Windows Server 2022. And my expectation is it will be there also in the future, because there are many, many legacy applications in the market that rely on remote desktop services in Windows Server. We have also learned that remote desktop services client access licenses are compatible for the down versioning. And I will open the original article here because the 2022 is missing here. This is the document about licensing. Here we can see that the RDS client access license in a newer version can for sure be used to access a previous version session host. But important is to understand that the newer client access license version can not be installed on a previous version of the licensing server. This means if we have a previous version of Windows Server as a licensing server and we want to install RDS client access licenses there, we will need a downgrade of the RDS CAL. And this downgrade is provided by the clearinghouse service. So when you activate RDS client access licenses, you will see a phone number you can call. And when you call this clearinghouse phone number, you will be able to provide your existing RDS CAL key you have purchased with your version 2022. And the clearinghouse service will provide you a previous version key you can use on your previous RDS host, RDS licensing host. The most asked question here is, what happens if I want to move to a newer version of the licensing server? So I have bought 2022 RDS CALs. I used the clearinghouse service to downgrade them to 2016, for example. And now a few months later, I want to upgrade them again to 2022. No worry, also here, the clearinghouse service will help you to migrate this RDS client access licenses. So regarding the RDS, it's important to understand the Office compatibility, because the situation is here that let's also check the link with the top latest information on there, that Microsoft will add the Microsoft 365 app support for Windows Server 2022. When I'm going to the support page, I will see, documentation. I will switch to English here, ENUS. And here we can see that Windows Server 2022 support for running Microsoft 365 apps for Server 2022 is currently in preview. This is important. So it's not yet released. So this means that today, and this was the screenshot on the slide from October, so for sure today is 20th December and not 24th of October. Today we still have the situation that the support for Microsoft 365 apps is not available on Windows Server 2022. And with this topic, I always explain to use a specific scenario, to build a specific scenario. It's important that the scenario is covered regarding the licensing. This is fine because the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise and the Microsoft 365 apps in business premium include the shared computer activation. This means licensing perspective, check is there. Technically, it works. So if you try to install Microsoft 365 apps on Windows Server 2022, it works. So it works. You're fine regarding the licensing. And now the issue actually is that it's not officially supported. So Microsoft says, please don't do it. If you call the Microsoft support, we will not be able to help you. And this is a difficult decision. Will you do it on your own risk or not? So it's your decision. But what's important to know that the support will be added later, maybe not this year, but maybe someone next year. Sorry, I wanted to switch to this slide here. And there we will have a support for Microsoft 365 apps on Windows Server 2022 till October 2026. On Windows Server 2019, it's already available today till October 2025. And for sure for Office LTSC, so the Office 2021 version from the volume licenses, we also have a support till October 2026. Okay, remote desktop services. Feel free to ask if you have questions here. Then in November, we talked about how to install and configure Active Directory domain services. I showed you in a live demo how to configure a first domain controller, how to configure a second domain controller. And yeah, you will find the recording also on youtube.com/Manfred Helber. In this live demo, you have seen that the domain functionality level and the forest functionality level is in Windows Server 2022 still Windows Server 2016. So we didn't receive any updates here, no renewals. So it's still Windows Server 2016. In November, we also talked about Azure Stack HCI version 2020 H2 and what is new there. We have seen a few new things regarding licensing. This was very important from my point of view, because when you move your workload to Azure Stack HCI, then I explained you in several calls, in several TechTalk calls, that we will receive extended security updates for free. So our workload that is transferred to Azure will receive extended security updates. This is today the case for Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2. And for 2008 and 2008 R2, Microsoft added a 4th year of extended security updates when our workload runs in Azure or on Azure Stack HCI. This is important to understand. Azure Stack HCI runs on premises. So these are servers that are in my data center. But because Azure Stack HCI is a service from Azure, the workload on Azure Stack HCI behaves like it would run in an Azure data center. And so Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 will receive extended security updates because of this benefit we have in Azure. We have to activate the benefit for Azure Benefits or the Azure Benefits feature to enable the extended security updates for Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2. And for sure, we will also receive the extended security updates for Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2012 R2, because I'm pretty sure you know that in October 2023, Windows Server 2012, 2012 R2 will be end of support. And so I will only receive security updates if I'm eligible to receive the extended security updates. And so I can extend my security updates till October 2026. The disadvantage in the past was that I had to pay additional money for Azure Stack HCI. So the monthly fee was $10 per physical core per month. The operating system, when I decided to use the subscription, was $23.30 per physical core per month. And since 2020 H2, we have a new option when we already have Windows Server licensed data center with software assurance. This includes the usage rights for Azure Stack HCI without any host service fee and add-on workloads without any host service fee. This is configured in an Azure portal. So we are going to the portal. There we can decide to activate the Azure Hybrid benefit. When we activate this Azure Hybrid benefit, our costs per physical core will be switched to $0. Also new in 2020 H2 was the ability to manage VMs from the Azure portal. We have seen this is in a live demo. If you want to review it, feel free to review the video recording on my YouTube channel here. Then we also talked in November about Azure Arc. Azure Arc is a very, very important topic, and we had a question about Azure Arc and Azure Update Management in the chat before, because Azure Arc enables us to build an arc, a bridge between services in different data centers. So Azure Arc allows us to use powerful Azure portal features for Windows and Linux VMs running in on-premises data centers, in different clouds. So we can see on the left-hand side the multi-cloud. This can be a third-party cloud data center. This can be an own hosted environment. So because this Azure Arc agent is installed on the endpoint and it's connected to Azure, we have the power of the Azure portal, of additional Azure services, and so on, to use them in all these scenarios, different cloud, on premises in our data center, at the edge, and not only in the Azure data centers. So Azure Arc is really, in my opinion, the most important service you should get in touch with if you are not already using this at your customers and in your in your own lab environments. And Azure Arc is for free. If you are using Azure Arc, you will not have any additional costs. You might have costs if you use Azure Arc to enable additional services like Azure Backup or Azure Monitor or Azure Security Center or things like this. But for Azure Arc itself, you will not have any costs. So there's no price list for Azure Arc. So there's only a price list for related services to Azure Arc. Okay, Azure Arc was one of our topics in November we talked about. Then we also talked about the architecture of Azure Arc, how it works. We talked about that Azure Arc only uses outbound connectivity, so you don't need any dedicated connectivity or things like this. It's a small agent, it's easy to handle, so really great technology. What we also have seen in November was the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. The Azure Arc Resource Bridge is an extension that provides a small Kubernetes cluster on premises that gives us the ability to, for example, deploy virtual machines from the Azure portal to our on-premises environment, or to start virtual machines, end virtual machines, configure settings on virtual machines. This is all provided by the Azure Arc Resource Bridge. And for sure, you can still use your questions or ask your questions. I'm only using the time to present some interesting content to you we had in the previous sessions here. Okay, then also in November, we talked about Windows Admin Center. Windows Admin Center is interesting to mention. There's a new version out. The version 2020-11 we used in our session in November the preview of the next version. It was the preview of Windows Admin Center 2020-08. Now the released version is 2020-11, and it has several extensions, easier handling, easier search in the surface, some fixed functionalities. Maybe you remember that there were some issues with the integration of Azure Monitor in the previous Windows Admin Center version and so on. This all now works again. The architecture has not changed. The architecture is still the same I presented to you in the November session. We have a small installation on a management server, and we access the Windows Admin Center from a browser. Edge or Chrome are supported, and the servers we manage with the Windows Admin Center will not receive an agent or something like this. Installed can be installed on a server or on a client, and we have different architecture models. My preferred model was model number 2, where I have a dedicated management server that is used to manage other servers in the network, but it's your decision which model you prefer. Then we also talked about AKS on Azure Stack HCI. Azure Kubernetes Services. And you can still ask your questions, but maybe you have also some time to give me a feedback in the chat. I really would be interested if you are already working with Azure Kubernetes Services, because so my situation is that I often talk about AKS, that I'm seeing a lot of demos from Microsoft about AKS. There are a lot of articles out. Um, and when I'm talking to partners, they often are not completely ready for using containerized workloads, because the important thing is, in difference to a VM, in a VM you can use Hyper-V, create a virtual machine, and you can install in the virtual machine typically everything that alternatively would run on a physical host. Yeah? You install a virtual machine with Windows Server, with Linux, with the previous Windows Server version. This all should work if you alternatively can run it on physical hardware. Sorry. um, with AKS, we have the situation, we have containerized workloads. The advantage is that a containerized workload has less footprint than a complete virtual machine, because a complete virtual machine always has the full OS installation. We always have the situation that we have um, the drivers inside the virtual machine, and so on, the services that are running. In containerized workloads, we are using container isolation or container virtualization, where we have an OS and running several containers on this specific OS. So a container is more efficient, but for sure, we cannot bring every application directly to a container. The application has to be containerized. And in my opinion, but I'm not sure if I'm true, in my opinion, this is the, let's say, limiter here, or the small showstopper, that not every application developer, not every workload is ready for containers here or is provided as containers. But for sure, maybe I'm wrong here, and um, you're already using the container technologies. Important is, this is the technology of the future, because when we look what options we have in scalability and which cost saving effects we have, then really containerized workloads should be the thing where we focus on for future workloads. An AKS cluster itself can be provided on Azure Stack HCI, so it runs on premises, but it brings the full Azure capabilities. And important is here to understand, we have a management cluster, we have the control plane and the worker nodes. So this means we have some infrastructure here to provide the AKS infrastructure. The cluster where our workload resists are the worker nodes, or is the worker node cluster here. Okay, AKS on Azure Stack HCI. Then we talked about Azure Stack HCI resiliency. This was already in December, where I explained in the Tech Talk, and the full recording is available on my YouTube channel, where I explained how the configuration with the drives works in Azure Stack HCI, how they have to be connected. I explained to you that Azure Stack HCI does not work with RAID controllers for the storage drives. It always needs host bus adapters. We also discussed this shared enclosure scenario, that the shared SAS configuration is still possible, but not in combination with storage spaces direct. This is important to know and important to understand. And regarding the resiliency, we discussed the way how storage spaces direct stores the data. I explained to you it cuts the volumes into extents, and the extents are distributed across the servers to ensure that we have original data and copies on each server. And the advantage of this extend model is that we can easily add servers. So if we add servers, the extents can be rebalanced to distribute the data across the existing servers. For sure, we can build Azure Stack HCI with a single node, then we only have local redundancy. With two servers, we can have the two-way mirror and the nested two-way mirror. With three-way servers, the three-way mirror. With four servers, there's no four-way mirror, but we have the three-way mirror and we have the dual parity. So as new resiliency options. Yeah, and we discussed how the server reacts or how it works if a drive fails. We discussed the pool quorum. I mentioned that in Azure Stack HCI, we always need the majority of the disk drives online. So we need always the pool quorum. Every drive has a vote. And when the pool quorum is online, the complete pool keeps online. This is important to understand when we have more complex scenarios with different data centers to ensure to know when your cluster keeps off online and when something will go offline here. We also talked a little bit about stretch cluster in Azure Stack HCI, where I explained to you there's an active-passive configuration or an active-active configuration. In an active-active cluster, both sides can be active. Both sides have virtual machine workload online and running. And this is what this graphic here shows. Both sides are active, both sides are running workload, and the data is distributed across the sites via storage replica. And storage replica allows more latency than storage spaces direct does. So inside the site, we are using the storage spaces technology across the sites. The storage replica functionality is used here. Okay, this was drives and resiliency. Then on 12th of December, we talked about Azure Stack HCI networking. The Azure Stack HCI networking, we have one question here. Hello, Manfred. What could be a reason if inside the failover cluster manager for a two-node cluster under storage enclosure is only one enclosure visible? So the question is this a traditional cluster or a storage spaces direct cluster? So the important thing is when we go to the failover cluster manager, let's see if I have a cluster here. This is a storage spaces direct cluster. This is an Azure Stack HCI cluster. So I can demo it here, I would say. When I'm going to one of these. Okay, it's in storage spaces direct cluster. So it's comparable to what I have here. Let's have a look at this configuration. So here I have the configuration where one node is paused. I will resume this machine here. And when I'm going to the failover cluster manager, you say you have also a two-node configuration. The two nodes are up and running. And let's give the second node a few seconds till it's recovered from its training. And when I'm going to storage, so it's still loading. Let's additionally open the Windows Admin Center here in this environment. Going to the Windows Admin Center. So in the Windows Admin Center, I have to reload the session. So this is an old Windows Admin Center installation, it seems so. Let's have a look here. This was not planned to use this machine, but based on your question, let's see if it's, let's use the new Windows Admin Center. Let's go to aka.ms/work download. So we need a Windows Admin Center. Okay, downloads here. Let's have a look at the nodes here additionally. So here the cluster node. It still has an issue with this failover cluster manager. What I wanted to say is that failover cluster manager is not intended to be used in this storage section for storage spaces direct, but my plan was to show you how it looks in my environment. I have here maybe some old stuff open. Let's use the task manager to kick this. Management console and task. Okay, so I will try to use the failover cluster manager again. And we can see we have the two nodes. Everything is fine. Everything is up and running. And I will extend the disks. And you mentioned that in enclosures, there's only one enclosure visible. And here in my configuration, I do not see any enclosure. This is what I wanted to explain to you. It's not intended, it's not to plan that we use the failover cluster manager in the storage section for storage spaces direct. So now the question is, why do you see an enclosure here? So what's the difference in your configuration? We can try to find out. So what I will do is I will install here the Windows Admin Center in the latest version. So we will need this to enable me to show you what I wanted to show you with the disk drives. And unfortunately, here in this demo environment, the Windows Admin Center is an outdated version and it has an outdated certificate. So I will use this to install a new version of the Windows Admin Center. And then we can install the new downloaded Windows Admin Center here. Uninstallation has finished. Let's install this one here. This is the latest version. It was released last week. So we'll do a default installation. I will not switch to English here. This is an issue in the Windows Admin Center. It doesn't take the default language of the installed OS. It always takes the language of the selected language pack, the installer here. But I think this is not relevant for us. The Windows Admin Center surface itself is in English language then again. Okay, installation is running. Let's have a look at the cluster itself. The name is D201 S2D-CL01. So I will add this cluster to the Windows Admin Center. Okay, Tom writes, the S2D storage is not set up right now because the failover cluster verification is giving me an error, not able to identify enclosure IDs for each node. Ah, this is important information. Okay. When we go back to the architecture of storage spaces direct, then here we see a 3-node cluster. You have a 2-node cluster. In my demo, this is also a 2-node cluster. We have the situation that the drives are connected directly to the server via serial ATA cable or via SAS cable. And it can be on an host bus adapter, or it can be directly on the board where a host bus adapter is integrated, or there could be a backplane in there. So I'm not sure what your configuration is, but you have the situation that your connecting object, the host bus adapter, or the SAS extender inside the chassis. The SAS extender is typically a module that's located at the backplane where you plug in the drives. They don't have a unique ID, and so your configuration is not suitable for storage spaces direct. Now, the first question is, did you use certified hardware? If yes, this should not happen. If you have an, today the name is Azure Stack HCI certified solution. It can also be used for Windows Server. If you have such a solution, you should talk to your solution vendor what went wrong here, because there you should have unique IDs. The issue is that a host bus adapter has an unique ID comparable to what a MAC address has. What a network card with a MAC address has. And you receive the information that the enclosure IDs for each node, okay, you don't have the message that they are not unique. This is the typical issue. You have the information that it's not able to identify enclosure IDs for each node. So yes, it should be certified. I checked the catalog site. So the catalog site means Microsoft.com/HCI. And it's really a solution from here, question mark. This should not happen. If you are going to find an Azure Stack HCI partner, and if you select a solution here from the catalog, so this does not mean a solution that looks similar. But if you choose exactly a solution here from the catalog, from any of these vendors, you shouldn't have any issues in the cluster validation. This is important. You have in your cluster validation the situation that you have the message not able to identify enclosure IDs for each node. This is different to what I previously said, where maybe the enclosure IDs are not unique. So it says, I can't get the ID for this enclosure, because if you have no SAS expander, if there's no SAS expander in these enclosures, so you have the server, you have the host bus adapter, and you have the drives directly connected to the host bus adapter, then the host bus adapter is your object that provides this enclosure ID. And if it's a certified hardware, this should happen. I've never seen issues there. I've seen issues with some pre-release samples where we had issues with this. I have seen issues with a certified solution in the market from times of Windows Server 2016 because there the enclosure ID was not fully checked. In your situation, maybe if you see you had the issue that you had an enclosure, one enclosure here in the failover cluster manager. And the interesting thing is, so you configured your Windows cluster, you added the two nodes, and now the question is, which enclosure are you seeing? Maybe you have a misconfiguration of the hostbus adapter in one of the nodes. Some hostbus adapter vendors offer a universal configuration where the hostbus adapter can be in traditional HPA mode, or where the hostbus adapter can be in RAID controller mode, or where maybe there are additional options that can be configured. So maybe you have a misconfiguration in this direction because it should look like it looks here in my configuration. So in storage, we expect you have Windows Server 2022 on your nodes. The enclosures is empty. It's identical in Windows Server 2019. It's different in Windows Server 2016. In Windows Server 2016, we had the servers as enclosures here. So this is a different behavior. Yeah, Tom writes, I tried with 2 to 4 nodes. There's always only one enclosure visible. But there should be no enclosure. This is the point. So I'm actually wondering why you have an enclosure here. So the issue is not that you are only seeing one enclosure. The issue is that you are seeing an enclosure, and maybe we can have a look at it in the Windows Admin Center together. So the installation should have been finished here now. So I will open the D201-WAC page. Okay, and let's add our storage spaces direct cluster here. D201 minus S2D CL01. I think this was the name here. And I'm using my credentials. Add them here. So when I'm now looking at the cluster, when I'm going to the drives, then the important thing is that you have an equal amount of drives in each node. So page has to be reloaded because some updates were installed. Now we can group them again by server. And then we can see we have the same amount and size and type of drives. So I'm really wondering what's the issue with your configuration, Tom. So maybe you can give me some more details in a follow-up mail, what your configuration exactly is. because there should be no enclosure visible in the failover cluster manager, and you shouldn't have the error you mentioned here. Feel free to ping me on Manfred at manfredhelber.de for a short mail with your configuration and maybe your cluster validation report you can add there, so I can have a look at this, because this is absolutely not typical. So important again, you should have no enclosure visible, and the issue is that you have the error not able to identify enclosure IDs for each node. So you will need to have this enclosure IDs, because Storage Spaces Direct distributes the data across the nodes. We talked about this. And this means that Storage Spaces Direct has to be absolutely clear which drives are in which server. So this is what is checked here for distributing the data. And we have learned the option that we could group servers by building a chassis or site or rack awareness. And the default awareness is the storage scale unit, and this means the server. And so this is important that this works. This is one of the foundations of Storage Spaces Direct. Okay, we had another question. Hello, Manfred. Can I install an Azure Stack HCI single node cluster without domain integration? From the technical perspective, it would be possible. It's similar to what we have with Office on Windows Server. It's actually not supported. So Azure Stack HCI today requires to be added into a local Active Directory domain. My expectation is that this requirement will be removed in the future, but today it's still there. So for a single node, we also would need a local Active Directory domain controller to add this single node cluster to be fully supported. From the technical perspective, you don't need it. Okay, so great for this question. Thank you for these questions. Great questions. Sorry, Tom, we couldn't fully clarify what your issue is, but maybe you will send me a follow-up mail with a few more details, and so we can work on this in a follow-up. So for all of you that watched the Tech Talks this year, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully there were some topics for you that were interesting for you. Hopefully you could learn a lot. If you missed Tech Talks, feel free to go to youtube.com/Manfred Helber and watch the recordings. And for those of you that are following my German content, we have some additional more German language calls this week, and then at the next days or in the next weeks, we have here in Germany some Christmas holidays. So for all of you that also have some free days there, I send you the best wishes. Enjoy the Christmas holiday time, and hopefully we will see next year again. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. Bye.